It's winter, but there's a heat wave, UFOs, and a series of meteor showers lighting up the sky. Strange things are afoot. For a start, there's a nation of folk who seem to dress like they're off to a William Shakespeare convention. It can only be 1964's Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. This is the first Godzilla film not to feature Godzilla in the title. The opening sequence does show Godzilla, along with other kaiju. The shots chosen are a bit odd because they're not the finest, but it's clear that multi-monster action is going to be a big part of this film. The film is a direct sequel to Mothra vs. Godzilla, so we have reprisals of roles from Godzilla regulars Akihiko Hirata, Takashi Shimura, Hiroshi Kozumi, and the Peanuts. There's also Yurika Hoshi, though in a different role. Notable additions are Akiko Wakabayashi, who would go on to become a Bond girl, and Kenji Sahara, in only his second appearance in a Godzilla film. He will go on to appear in over a third of Toho's Godzilla movies. The main lead, Detective Shindo, is played brilliantly by Yusuke Natsuki. The film starts with meteor showers and discussions about the unseasonal warm weather in January. There's also a rumour that a visiting princess is at risk of assassination. It's a fear not without foundation. While flying to Japan, a strange voice in her head tells her to jump from the aeroplane. Much to her servant's distress, she does just that. Moments later, the plane is blown to bits by a hidden explosive device. Sometimes those voices in your head turn out to be right all along. She reappears in Japan a little while later, claiming to be from Venus, and prophesizing the end of the world starting with a disaster at Mount Aso. It turns out she's right. A monster emerges from the ground there. Rodan. As usual, let's have a look at the monsters. Well, I've just mentioned Rodan, so let's start there. This pterosaur-type kaiju first appeared in his own film in 1956. It's not the most impressive kaiju, but they'll be worse in future films. Rodan flies. Sometimes he flaps his wings, and sometimes he doesn't. You can hear a jet-style noise when he's flying though, so to me that explains his speed and his ability to fly without moving his wings. Rodan has pretty limited movements, but he does seem to wobble his head quite a bit. There are noticeable differences between model shots and suitmation. The suit has to accommodate a human body and has a longer neck, usually with a bulbous part, which is the actor's head. Between takes you can really see the differences in the neck. Here it's long, here it's short. There are clear inconsistencies. Mothra, however, is the first kaiju we see. Now the Toho monster universe exists in a reality where people are familiar with kaiju, and because this continues directly from the last film, Mothra is loved and is even the subject of a TV segment where two young boys say they'd love to meet her. Mothra's fairy friends enjoy celebrity status now. We see them on stage being interviewed. It's while on TV that they drop the bombshell that one of Mothra's offspring is dead, but that the other is thriving and keeping peace on the island. We then experience a very weird sequence where the fairies psychically enable the boys to meet Mothra by closing their eyes and listening to Mothra's song. The baby Mothra looks just like it did in the last film. As I said before, it would have been easy to make this a fairly inanimate puppet that was simply dragged around on a string, but instead of that, it's articulated and it looks really good. So let's look at Godzilla. Again, the Big G utilizes the same suit as the last film, so the body looks pretty much the same. I think it looks like it's been thinned out slightly, but I might just be imagining it. But it still looks good. The head, though, has seen some modifications. He needed them as the face broke in the last film. But it feels like a step in the wrong direction. The face doesn't have the intense stare of the last film, and the mouth just feels wrong. The proportions of the face feel a bit off, and it gives a bargain bucket aesthetic, which is a shame. But Godzilla isn't the headline act. King Ghidorah is. Formed from energy after hatching from a meteorite, King Ghidorah is badass. He might have no arms, but he's a triple-headed, dual-tailed, lightning-spitting titan. His golden scales are majestic, and act as great armor against any attack. King Ghidorah is an impressive beast, and the act of puppeteering this huge mass of moving heads must have been a nightmare. You can see the strings, but that only serves to remind you how incredible a job the crew are doing to keep King Ghidorah moving whilst not tying his necks into knots. Combine that with the strings used for Rodan, Mothra and Godzilla's tail, and you can appreciate how difficult it must have been to shoot the battle scenes. Speaking of fighting, this film may feature epic monsters, but the battles don't feel too epic. The initial fights between Rodan and Godzilla are camp and a bit lackluster. Rodan can fan his wings to create powerful gusts, But we saw this before in the last film, and to be honest, Mothra did it way better. Rodan pecks Godzilla's head, but it doesn't seem particularly savage. It just looks funny. It looks more like he's trying to annoy Godzilla rather than do any real harm. Mothra could drag Godzilla by the tail, but Rodan goes one better and picks him up. This is probably the most dangerous Rodan gets, dropping Godzilla from a height. We do get a gloriously bonkers moment. Godzilla and Rodan appear to play rock volleyball. This goofy scene goes on for an inordinate amount of time, with Mothra spectating. Eventually, Mothra sprays Godzilla with silk, and Rodan seemingly laughs, until he gets sprayed too. It's truly bizarre. And by the way, the direction the silk spray hits Godzilla and Rodan makes no sense when you see the relative position of Mothra. Anyway, King Ghidorah is so powerful that the fairies realize the only way to defeat him is for Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra to team up. It's never been more obvious how the Godzilla film franchise has changed. The horror and analogy of atomic warfare, with Godzilla representing the aftermath of our own actions in an attempt to force humanity to face our responsibilities, has given way to kitsch action and humour. Gojira was a perfect standalone film. But the cinema industry has changed, with the popularization of TV, and a shift to fun family entertainment enables the Godzilla franchise to continue on the big screen. The transformation of Godzilla from a destructive metaphor to fun hero happens in this film. That's not to say that there's no moralistic element to this title. There's a brief comment about atomic weapons that reminds us how dangerous they are, a theme of teaming up to tackle a challenge, and a strong message that the Earth itself doesn't just belong to humankind. Although the tone of the film is completely different to the first one, it still works. It's a tonal shift that's been going on over 4 or 5 films. And given that this film opens with people wearing Elizabethan-style neck ruffs and soon moves on to explosions between parallel dimensions, it sets expectations pretty early on that this is going to be a batshit crazy movie and not a post-war political dissection. Toho started popping out Godzilla films at quite a rate in the 60s, and as a result, I feel this title suffered somewhat. Although the plot is not that much more bonkers than the last film, the story lacks narrative strength, and you could miss a chunk and it wouldn't really make much difference of your understanding of events. The main failing of this film is a lack of thematic glue. The feature doesn't hold together well, and as for the final act, well, I'll come to that in a few moments. Akira Ifukube's score feels like the strongest element of the film, along with King Ghidorah's iconic design. There's less of Tsuburaya's special effects, but there are still some excellent shots. Most of the action takes place where there's little around to destroy, but when there are built-up areas, they look excellent. The harbour looks superb, and when Godzilla warps through the streets, it remains impressive. The most impressive shots are the ones showing the destructive force of King Ghidorah's lightning. It strikes buildings and feels genuinely powerful. The models are fantastic. It's a sound investment, as a lot of this footage will be reused in future Godzilla films to save costs. We are left in no doubt that King Ghidorah is an intimidating force, far more powerful than any other kaiju we've seen so far. The fact that 3 other kaiju must join forces to stand a chance to defeat him really emphasizes his superiority. He's huge, he's strong, and he's beautiful. The film gets you excited for an epic battle of 3 against 1. We know the incredible destructive force of King Ghidorah and expect a monumental battle to determine the future of planet Earth. It's a shame, then, that the final battle isn't as climactic as it deserves to be. It's more funny than breathtaking. I actually laughed when Mothra got blasted and pinged off into the air. Mothra hitching a lift on Rodan's back is pretty funny too, but not as funny as Godzilla getting zapped on the ass. The battle is certainly creative and has some good moments, but ultimately Godzilla throws a few rocks, Mothra sprays silk, and King Ghidorah flies off. The finale should have been a spectacle. It's definitely the best fight of the film, but when Ghidorah does fly away, it doesn't seem like a convincing victory. You half expect him to circle back round and have another go. It's all very anticlimactic, and it doesn't feel like the issue has been resolved at all. Although the film doesn't deliver a great ending, it achieves its goal of being humorously entertaining. It's not a Godzilla classic, it's fairly middle of the road. But it does intrigue us for what will happen next in the Godzilla film franchise, as instead of seeing 3 scary monsters, we see a heroic trio. As for King Ghidorah, we definitely haven't seen the last of the Golden Dragon.